Hey everybody, it's Matt Robinson. Welcome to another edition of the Writer's Block. For those of you who've caught my presentation about the lessons I learned from publishing my first book, I talk about one of the important parts of the process that I learned was finding your allies, those people who can read your manuscript over and over and over and give you effective feedback, constructive feedback, and who'll give you a real, honest, authentic read, not like your friends and family per se, but also who have your best interests at heart. And I'm really glad to have one of my main allies here tonight. We've waited a long time to have him. Scott Hubeny is a fellow educator, fellow writer, and a good friend. Welcome to the show, Scott. It's really great to have you here.
Matt, thanks for finally having me on. It took you a while, but I'm glad you finally.
You're in high demand. Scott, when not writing, he is a full-time educator in the Avon Public Schools. We were both in Boston Public.
That's right.
He's also written books and made his own calendar, which we'll get to in a moment. Has 5 kids,
yes.
Various wildlife around the house.
Yes, that's true.
And also Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and hobbies abounding.
Yes,
so
indeed.
Busy guy. So we're very fortunate to have you here, and I'm very grateful to have you around because when I was making my first book, it was hard to find people who would look at it over and over and over again, like I said. And I had unfortunately a number of experiences where, as a journalist, I'd pitched ideas and they would be kind of co-opted by someone else. So I was a little reticent about sharing my book idea because I didn't want someone else to take it away. Working with Scott, he was working on a book at the same time, and we became like an accountability team for each other. We really, checked in every couple weeks. How you doing? What have you been up to? So it's really productive, and your books really opened up a lot of new worlds to me, and we've shared contacts. It's really been a great relationship. So when I first met you, you were doing 180 Days.
Indeed.
Which is a book and a calendar about the trials of being in education.
Yes,
so
yes.
How long had you been teaching when that idea came about, and what brought it about?
Okay, good question there. So, as an educator, you live through some very interesting moments, some very funny moments. Part of survival as an educator is really being able to debrief those moments, find the humor in those moments, the challenges you often face in the classroom. If you can't cry about it, at least you can laugh about it, right? So, besides just telling the stories to coworkers and sharing with one another in like the teacher's lounge, our different struggles and different things we went through, I started coming up with the idea because I love Sunday comics, as I'm sure most people do. So I came up with the idea of creating a comic strip, that was about education, teachers in the classroom, and the different things they face, and base it on some of real life experiences I myself and some of my colleagues had, and put that out there. And it got my colleagues loved it. We actually did a few, believe it or not, some videos on YouTube to try like live action for a little bit, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun making those comics. It's on the web now, so if you go to 180dayswithaz.com, you'll see a lot of them are now on the web, still living out there on the internet. Yes.
Well, how did you decide to pick out certain ones for the calendar? Where did that idea? Just so your colleagues could have it around all the time?
Yeah, so the calendar one is, there's one for each month, and it was really based on what's a common theme you would see as an educator during that month. Some months there's a lot of holidays that happen, and there's a lot of different things that happen with students around those times. So those were more themed for what's going on in the month, like June, where we're just dragging through and things like that. So each month had kind of a theme, and that's what the calendar was all about, really like kind of locking in that theme for the month.
Yep. Is it something you're still doing?
In terms of the comics?
Yeah.
It's I haven't made a new comic in quite some time. There's lots of other projects that we'll probably talk about that have been distracting my time. And you mentioned in the introduction, I do have, family and other responsibilities. So I haven't created a new comic in quite some time, but they are still out there online. And who knows, I may be inspired once again, but right now I have some other projects that are, taken my focus and efforts.
Right. One of the projects that came up in the interim was this book, The Science Squad.
Yes.
That was, you were kind of asked to write that by an outside organization?
Yes, so I had the fortunate opportunity to take place in a science teacher fellowship through UMass Boston. It's called the Wipro Fellowship. And one of the great things about that fellowship, their aim is to create teacher leaders. And one thing they allow you to do as you go through that fellowship is kind of come up with your own project that you want to do, kind of like your capstone for that year you spent together through that fellowship. And I didn't want to do something just so that's already been done. I really wanted to kind of allow my creative juices to release through this fellowship. So I came to them with the idea of a book that's a fictional book for children that through the story will get them excited about science. And then we'll introduce the actual science the characters are using to kind of solve the problems and conflict they face in the story. And they loved the idea, and I went forward with it, and that's how the Science Squad came about.
Yes. And that's one of the books, that's a project that I actually got the privilege to edit a little bit, so it was great to just see how another author applies their craft. It was really privileged to do that. So thank you for that opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for all your hard work and effort.
Yeah. It says book 1 again. Is there a book 2?
That's funny. So a lot of people ask that because it does say book 1. And I did that on purpose to kind of whet the appetite, So a lot of people are asking. So I wrote a couple chapters of book 2, but now it's kind of, taken a little spot on the shelf until I get through some other projects. But people are asking about book 2. It's long overdue, so I think it's going to have to come forward eventually, but it's not finished yet.
Okay. Well, I guess we have to stop hinting and alluding to one of your projects because I know it well. I'm actually working with a former guest on the show, Tom Lerick of Red Barn Publishing, on a book that I had started about 20 years ago and had kind of put to bed.
Yes.
Because I wasn't really getting anywhere with the traditional path of publisher, agent, etc.
Right.
But it, like the Science Squad, is a book for children meant to get children interested in music, which is another category in education that seems to be somewhat pushed aside a little bit in favor of high stakes testing and all those things that we could talk about.
We could have a whole other show.
Yeah, right, well, that's what's in 180 days is the frustration of testing and MCAS and all that.
Exactly.
But and you many years ago, I needed a cover illustration, and I said, who do I know who's a talented illustrator who might be able to do a cover for me? And I called you.
And after you went through that long list,
you were my first call, and you did beautiful work. And one of the reasons, it really helped bring it back to life for a while. So Tom is now publishing it, and you are now my illustrator. So this is one of the projects you are working on.
This is the project that is taking precedence right now for me. Yes.
Yeah, well, I very much appreciate that. So I didn't, I wanted a full disclosure for, I want to have authenticity and integrity to our viewers here. One question I'd like to ask you, I know that your focus is science, but obviously you see student writing, and you know the tools that are now available.
Yes.
As someone who has written professionally, what is your honest opinion on the level and expertise or lack thereof, unfortunately, of student writing these days?
Yes. You've really hinted at it there. You really set the stage. It's not looking pretty, right, for students in writing. I think some of it you mentioned is because a lot of education has taken a very high stakes focused approach. It's kind of drawn out a lot of the creativity that educators had to introduce into the classroom because it's so regimented with hidden standards, staying on pace, making sure you're prepared for the tests they have to take. That a lot of the creativity that used to be in education that we experienced when we were younger isn't there anymore. And I think it really turns students off to writing. And because they don't have that intrinsic motivation to write, they're just not into it. They just don't feel like it's something they enjoy. Their writing suffers. And now we have to mention AI. And students, are growing up now with this tool, which should be a tool to help them. But, I see students use it instead of a tool as a replacement for learning how to write and writing well. In the process, as you know, as a writer, it takes to refine that craft. Whereas now, they're relying on more and more for this AI to do it for them and not really struggling with that craft of writing. And so I am very concerned about, how this is going to affect our future writers. It's something to consider and think about, and to keep an eye on how it's going to unfold and what we can do as educators to help students navigate these tools they have appropriately.
Do you use your books and your written projects with your students to kind of show them that it can be a way to access even science, which some students might not put together?
I definitely shamelessly plug my things whenever I can, as a way to show, because a lot of students, interestingly enough, that aren't into reading will be into reading. Graphic novels is big with a lot of young people these days. So just showing them, there's other forms of literature that you can learn from. You've seen, history texts that have now taken on graphic novel forms, and educators are kind of struggling with how to approach this. Are we for it, or are we against it? But just showing students there's other ways that they can engage with the craft of writing and engage with reading is a lot of what I do with my own work. And like I said, the purpose of the book to get them interested in learning. Anything that could draw them in and get them interested in learning about science, is something I show them. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that's really how this show started, is I just wanted to have a way to engage other writers and talk about the craft and talk about how many, it's relatively easy these days to get published. Whether it's going to be a million sellers is another issue, but I've always really encouraged people to tell their stories. And one thing that I see as a writing teacher is a lot of my students come to me and say, I was told I'm a bad writer. And I think that's really, not a fair assessment.
Wow.
Because, when I was teaching in Boston Public, I had students who weren't native born or native English speakers. So clearly there was going to be misunderstandings, but that doesn't mean they're a bad writer.
Right.
I certainly couldn't write in Haitian Creole or the languages that they were coming to me with any more that they could write in English. But it's about encouraging the idea and building what I like to talk about as the communicative confidence that you have a story to share. So that you have these two different approaches: the comic graphic novel arena, and then the more traditional text arena. But about science, I think it's a wonderful way to show them how many different angles and approaches there are, and hopefully get them interested.
Yeah, I'd like to speak a bit about that, because that could be crushing to a young person about, to get that feedback. And I know, like I said, with the way education is and so focused on particular standards and things like that, where it kind of drains creativity, it could really, really just take all motivation these young people have for writing. And I have a story when I was younger where I wrote a story. I don't know what grade this was. It had to be, elementary, very young. But I wasn't a good student. Just full disclosure, I wasn't a good student in elementary. Did not care really about school when I was younger. But for some reason, I guess just having the creativity to write a short story excited me. For some reason, on that nice sunny afternoon, instead of going outside and playing wiffle ball, I sat down at the table and I wrote a story about a monster called the Screech for some reason. And when I handed in, the teacher called me up the next day, and I thought as usual I was in trouble, because that's usually, called me up and asked, "Did you write this?" And I said, "Yeah." And they questioned me, "Did you write this?" Did not believe I wrote that. And it kind of took me aback, because I said, "What is this? Why do they not believe me?" But I realized for the first time, when I put effort into something, the results that came out, the teacher couldn't even believe it. And it really stayed with me for the rest of my life, and maybe that's what led me to write later in life, is like realizing there was something there even someone else could see, that I myself didn't even know about.
Right.
You know.
Well, also, I mean, just because you don't make your living as a writer doesn't mean you're not a writer. It's a way to communicate. It's a way to share. You're a science teacher, but you did the teaching part and the science part, and now
right.
you're looking into the music
yes,
world, and
yes.
so it's a tool like anything else. But to your point, there's been a lot of debate about with AI, and
right.
when do you challenge the student and when do you not? Because it can, if you're wrong, it can be very damaging to say to the student, "I don't believe you wrote this." And they are able to prove that they did, but then
right,
how do you go forward with that relationship? I had it happen in high school, a similar situation. I wrote a story that was about something that had actually happened in my life, which was kind of disturbing, and my teacher thought that I was plagiarizing Stephen King.
Wow.
And when I convinced them that it was real, their jaw hit the floor and they apologized profusely, and but we weren't really able to have that that trusted relationship going forward. I mean, that it was difficult to get past, to know that someone that I looked up to, who was kind of a mentor and who was clearly teaching because they love language, kind of doubted and so I've had it happen where you have students doing writing in class, and then you get their paper that they do at home, and the style doesn't match. Does that mean that something is amiss, or not necessarily?
Wow.
And it's a very difficult choice to make about whether to bring it up or not.
Yeah.
Allegedly there are these tools that will check how much AI was used, but even those are wrong.
They're not always correct.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the key takeaway is, as anyone who's trying to get young people interested in writing, is not to crush their spirits.
Yeah.
Whether it's you're giving them boring assignments or you're questioning what they wrote, it's like, how can we approach this in a way that will encourage them and promote this? So it's interesting, very interesting.
Now, when I've taught, I've been adjuncting at the college level, and I found that when I teach at schools, like I've taught at Mass College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences and at Bentley, which is kind of business oriented, I've had students who say, "I don't think I need this class because I don't think I'm going to need to write." They really don't see where the writing is going to fit in their lives. Are you seeing that in science classes, that students are, "I'm going to be a math and science person, all I need to know is numbers"? Is there that sort of, do they see that separation from writing?
Just to put this out there as another thing to consider, I have very few students tell me, "I'm going into math and science," but that's a whole nother topic, right? Why is that? But for the ones that do want to pursue careers in math and science and technology, I do feel they do tend to discount writing and the need for writing. And I think this really brings to my consciousness, how can I, make sure they understand the importance in whatever field you're pursuing, whatever field, how important it is to be able to communicate effectively, through writing. But now with the tools they have a lot to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, because it would be easy to not really focus on it and lean heavily on the tools when they do need it for a cover letter or business plan or whatever it might be. Yeah.
Interesting.
So I think as you said, our challenge is to just get them excited and to see writing has value somewhere in your life. You're going to have to communicate something, because it really is just putting your ideas on paper. It's not much different than speaking.
Yeah.
So. You have recently gone from, a few years ago, you went from Boston Public, where we to Avon, which is closer to your home on the South Shore.
Yes, indeed.
What are the differences you've noticed in terms of parent involvement, student engagement, things of that sort? And I guess especially pertaining to writing, but in general.
Okay. Well, every school is unique. Every school is different. I can't speak for all of Boston. I could just speak to where I was. I was at East Boston High School, and that's really a large, almost a community type school, because as traveling to East Boston is quite a trek. You're going through this magical tunnel filled with smog and traffic, and then you pop up on the other side near an airport. And so really, it's very fascinating to be part of, to have been part of East Boston, to see the change, because I was there for about 14 years or so, and to really see the change in the demographics that occurred just within that time. Because East Boston is a place where they have a large population of newcomers into the school and into the neighborhood. And to see the shift, used to be a largely Italian neighborhood, and now it's largely Latino neighborhood. And so it was, over 80% Latino population. So that's just a whole culture in and of itself there. And I don't think you'll really find that in other schools, even around Boston. And I think that's what's interesting about Boston. I think every neighborhood is probably going to have its own culture. And even coming to Avon, I was surprised to see just how diverse this small town in the South Shore is. And I think it's just because of just people recently coming into the country and just following where friends and family are, and you get these pockets of different cultures that pop up. And it's just been really interesting to see just how diverse it is over there, and just a different type of diversity than I found at East Boston, yeah.
What new tactics or traditions or strategies have you found to be useful with your new student population?
Well, it's you don't want to reinvent the wheel. I've been teaching for over a decade, and even before I taught high school, I taught young children for almost a decade. So I have quite some time in honing my craft. I wouldn't say anything revolutionary, anything new. Kind of a lot of what we were talking about with writing is the same tactics I use with teaching science. How can I get them motivated and excited to learn? So I've been focusing on just projects that assess what they're learning, to get them hands-on and involved in the learning, to apply that knowledge. And I think now, as well as we see the changes in how the state is going to be assessing in the graduation requirement, as you're familiar with, the vote that went through, I think now is a good time for us educators to really shift how we assess student learning from, the standard test-based assessment to more like project-based assessment. I think now is a good time to start making that shift, as we see finally, hopefully, a shift in how we're thinking about how do we measure student learning. So I would say, yeah, that's what I'm trying to move more into.
And does writing have a role in that?
Writing always has a role. And again, I like introducing writing into my class as a way to allow students to be creative. And one of the ways we can do this, as we talk about assessing student learning, is really allowing them choices in how they want to be assessed and how they want to show their learning. And if some students want to express themselves written, to allow them to have that option to write, because some students want to write, believe it or not. I know we're talking about the ones that maybe don't like to, but some do. And to allow them to have that choice to write about science, to write about what they learned, is a lot of what I like to do in the class as well, because it's a lot of fun to see what they come up with.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can see why you were born to be an educator, and the books are great. And again, it's been a pleasure being your friend and colleague and working together.
Thank you.
And we'll probably see you again when we're celebrating the new book project out and about.
Yes,
but in the meantime, if you want to write, the inspiration is out there. Your allies are out there. I hope you can find them, and I hope to see you again on the next edition of the Writer's Block.